Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trucking Tower podcast. I'm very excited to be joined today by Doug Parks. How are you doing today, Doug?
Good. How are you, Andy?
I'm really good. Thank you. Appreciate you coming on with me. We're going to dive into kind of venture capital and technology a bit here in our segment. And I just have some questions to ask you for some success tips and pitfalls to avoid. And I appreciate you for you coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Just to kick off, where were you? What happened? Who are you surrounded with that inspired you to do what you do today?
So I would say right when I graduated college in 2012, I was networking and figuring out what I was going to do with my life and where I was going to kind of start my career. And I had an interest in finance. I had worked at a global macro hedge fund the summer before. So I was speaking with some hedge funds in the Connecticut area. And I got in touch with an old family friend of mine. His name is Brad Higgins. And he had spent 20 years on Wall Street as a lawyer and as an investment banker. And he spent about 10 years in the federal government in the State Department under Condoleezza Rice. And in high school, I had gone to his swearing in ceremony. So we have family pictures of us in DC and seeing him with his hand on the book and raising his hand with Condoleezza.
Very nice.
And, graduating college, didn't have a full-time job and was trying to figure out what am I going to do next. And I got in touch with Brad, and he took me to lunch at a Chinese food restaurant, and he brought along his patent attorney. And he basically just was telling me about what he was doing. He was doing venture capital deals through a family office called SOS Ventures. Johan, his patent attorney, was with us. And not only was he doing our legal counsel, but he also had an engineering background. So he was a scientist. And all the deals that Brad looked at had a hardware component to him. And Johan was instrumental in helping us evaluate those. So, I wouldn't really be here today if I didn't take that Chinese food lunch with Brad and Johan. And we worked together for 3 years. And built a venture portfolio of 10 companies with about 30 million in AUM. So that's really kind of where I started my career. And I've kind of danced this line between the intersection of finance and technology ever since.
Right. And you're involved in some really neat technology as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been working with Hippo Technologies for a little bit over a year now. They had been founded by Pat Quinlan, who was not only is he a doctor, but he also ran a healthcare network in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. And so he brings a wealth of experience. Brian Hamilton is another co-founder, and he had started this wearables technology company. And they got together and realized that there was a pretty large gap in the virtual healthcare market. And Hippo Technologies sells wearable headsets for medical professionals that have all the same components as a tablet. So if you think of like an iPad, it has a camera, it has a screen, it's wireless, Bluetooth, and cellular enabled. And their intention was to sell this to medical professionals or emergency personnel, or even in the education space, to extend the quality of healthcare that patients were receiving. So you could have someone in sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East working for a nonprofit providing medical care and wearing this headset, and they could have a doctor at Johns Hopkins back in the States live in the situation and providing advice, knowledge, and expertise.
That's awesome. It's incredible to see how far technology has come just in the last 15 years or so. It's incredible. And just want some advice for those that are watching out there. What would you say are the top 3 mistakes in this area of VC in particular to avoid?
So the 2 that come immediately to mind are toxic optimism and shiny object syndrome. And toxic optimism is, within the startup community, whether you're a venture capitalist, a startup entrepreneur, or even a coder, a lot of people that come up with product ideas, they have to be optimistic and crazy in the first place to pursue them. But in the course of product development, business development, people get very enthralled with their own ideas, and they get toxically optimistic, and they can't accept any criticism or feedback, or they can't look at the business situation and be realistic about what changes need to happen to take the business or the product in the right direction. So I would say there's definitely a healthy balance between pessimism and optimism that you always have to kind of keep in mind, but just always be aware that toxic optimism is something that more often than not can end a startup or put it down the wrong path, because there are times where if something's not working, you have to make the decision to pivot strategically. And it takes a lot of courage and a leap of faith to make that pivot.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second that I mentioned, which I've seen a lot, is the idea of the shiny object syndrome, where you'll have a lot of the entrepreneurs in the technology community are insanely creative, and they're creating products, and they are always, spinning out ideas, several a minute. But you do have to have a certain amount of focus to chase the idea that you've decided on, that you've built a business plan around, that you've raised investors' money on, and you do have to focus and run with that idea. And, what's amazing to me in the course of my time in venture capital and technology is time will go by very quickly. And while it is important to pivot, you do have to kind of maintain a focus of what the goal is, because it could take, 6 months to a year to 2 years to achieve a certain goal, whether, it's in product or developing a sales team. And you need to have a certain amount of focus to not get distracted from that goal and from that vision, because you'll just end up wasting energy and taking resources away from the company or the project.
Great points of advice. I appreciate all of that. What are your top 3 or 2 or 3 success secrets? Companies that are successful, what kind of things do you see that they do that maybe are a little different than the ones that don't succeed?
I would say that the world that we live in is very technology enabled. We're speaking over Zoom, which is awesome. Think about how many emails you're sending a day. Think about how many text messages you're sending a day. But at the end of the day, business, no matter how much technology is involved with human interaction, business comes down to relationships. And if you take care of your relationships, whether it's you to your client, you to your investors, if you take good care of your relationships, everything else will fall into place. So whenever someone asks me for advice, whether it's in building a career or building a business, I just always emphasize, think of your relationships first, and everything else will take care of itself.
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree. In fact, my career has been people that I knew and worked with that led to the next thing. And it's been throughout my career. And, I graduated college in 1996. And so throughout my career, relationships make a huge difference. There's no doubt about it.
And it's fun because you may have, someone, you may graduate college, or you may leave, graduate high school. But those relationships will stay with you forever, and it's funny to see how people will weave themselves back in and out of your life, say 5 to 10 to 15 years down the road. I reconnected with someone that I swam with in high school when I was at Columbia Business School. I hadn't talked to this person at least 10 to 12 years, but there they were sitting next to me in class again. So, definitely, take good care of your relationships and your reputation, because you never know when you'll run into people again later down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to burn bridges. When you've decided to move on, do it in the best way possible that you can. And of course, keep in touch with people. I think that's great advice. What would you say about your guest experience on my show?
I would say that this has been a lot of fun. Like I mentioned, this is my first podcast, but I'll take your advice. I'd like to do 10 a year. So this is one. I've got 9 more to go before December 2021. And, it's an awesome experience, first podcast, and now I want to do more.
Well, good. I'm glad it didn't scare you away.
Yeah.
So, how can we support you? What are you working on? How can we support you?
Yeah, I think, with my time at Hippo Technologies, we're very much keen on kind of building a medical professional network. And so if you run across anyone that's in the virtual healthcare space or that is involved with healthcare or healthcare technology, please feel free to give us an introduction, because we're always we're always scouting for good talent and for advisors. So that would be a huge help. And then I'm also very excited to kind of have this posted in the public space. I'm very kind of keen on developing my digital presence. I've seen the world go into a very remote fashion with COVID, and I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. So just very excited to be part of this in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. People will check out your website and your social media profiles before they'll even talk to you. So we live in that age, that digital age, where people will look at all your material and so forth, the testimonials, before they'll even have a phone conversation with you. So I've seen that, play out in my own career, especially within the last couple of years, and even more so with COVID. It just fast tracked that big time.
All these trends like really accelerated in the past year. So, I think when things start opening up and everyone's going back to offices, it'll be interesting to see how much the trend slows down. But I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Right, absolutely. And what would you say as a final word, advice for people that are either one and looking into venture capital or working with the technology? What would you say as a final word?
I would say follow your interests. And if you don't know what your interests are, take the time, whether it's 15 to 30 minutes a day to write. If when you're drinking your coffee in the morning, have a pad and take notice of the things that you find interesting in the news. Think of technology products or services that you find particularly interested in. So, whatever your interests are, follow those, whether in the technology scene or the venture capital scene, because that is where your passion lies and that is where you're going to find success. So, understand what you care about and be able to articulate it. And the best way to do that's through writing.
Absolutely. I really do appreciate all the advice you've given today, as well as coming on with me. You did a fantastic job.
Yep.
And so that's going to do it for this edition of the Trucking Tower Podcast, Expert Insights. I really appreciate you coming on with me today, Doug. And we'll see everybody real soon.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.